So good afternoon, good morning, maybe, good evening, especially to people who might be watching this on replay. And welcome to Gen CFO's Deep Dive. Today, we have a super relevant subject to go through. It's going to be really interesting to break down this concept of VUCA. We're going to be talking to some great panelists about the complexity that's happening in the world, the uncertainty that's happening in the world at the moment, but obviously focus in on finance and planning and what it means to us as accounting and finance professionals. I have given everyone strict instructions. This isn't a political debate, but by all means wade in on the chat if you feel like you want to. It might be quite therapeutic. So just to kick things off, my name is Chris Argent. If you don't know me, you probably do if you signed up to this one, but I lead Gen CFO, and we are the world's largest finance leadership community of practice. Community in terms of people or getting together, but in terms of practice where we are actually talking about what we do on a regular basis. We are trying to learn from each other. We are sharing our insights and we're all growing together. We have this lean towards people, data and digital. And that's very much seen as a sort of new way of doing things. And we also have an online community if you want to do something online as well as viewing something or even joining our physical events. So that's me. Our community is like I said, it's both online and offline. We have, a number of live events to come along to. We find that people having conversations about this travels way past the webinars, way past the online chat, and actually sometimes sharing things face to face in confidence is where you do a lot of the learning. One of the things that I would like to highlight at the moment, though, is that we have an amazing awards, which will be for the third year next year, where we celebrate everything relating to change and transformation on the talent and tech side. We call it the Digital Finance Function Awards. And if you're interested in that, then please do reach out to us or join the community and you'll find a Digital Finance Function Awards group there. The dates for that, just so that you're aware, are the 19th of June next year. And we also have a couple of events coming up there if you happen to be in the area. These physical events, as referred to, Gen CFO North and Gen CFO South, based in Leeds and London. And we will have another deep dive in December to cover off another fresh topic. A bit of housekeeping for today. It's super important that you get a chance to ask your questions, and I just want to make sure that I see those. So if you have Q&A functionality on your Zoom, then please use the Q&A functionality to ask questions to me and to the panelists. If you want to chat amongst yourselves and maybe say hi now, maybe where you're from or what your VUCA issue is at the moment, then please use the chat. We will try and get through all of the questions in the time, so do ask the Q&A questions. This is being recorded and it will be on the community platform, but just give us sort of 24 hours, 48 hours to do that. And you'll have a permanent record of it there if you want to share it with other people. So today is a webinar sponsored by Jedox. These things don't happen by themselves, no matter how strong our community is. And we've got a brilliant expert from Jedox to help us today break this down. Jedox is an enterprise platform management software solution for planning, analysis, reporting, and optimization of value creation processes. So all very much aligned to what we do in accounting and finance. Now, I'm just going to touch on the panelists for today before I do a bit of an intro on the subject. We have Abby, Natalia, and Rolf, an expert panel. But just so that we are all on the same page to get things started, I just want to break down what VUCA is. Now, the last time we did a webinar, I don't think, any CFO, any finance leader on that webinar a month ago had confronted, some of the uncertainty, and we'll come on specifically to one area, some of the uncertainty in their career. They had never come across it, and I think it was resulting in lots more planning, lots more questions, lots more demand from the business, whether it was trying to manage cash, whether it was trying to monitor receivables, whether it was trying to get more customer contracts in. And, I think it was very, very uncertain times for people. So, we ask our communities to try and set the agenda for us. So we're breaking down VUCA here today. Now, VUCA is a term that actually came out of the military, and it was a way of just assessing where we're at. So what's happening in the situation, what do we know about the situation, and how predictable the result is. And I think VUCA kind of describes what we're going through now, and it's quite a nice way to frame a lot of this conversation. VUCA meaning volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And I think if you looked at your risks and opportunities that you might be reporting on every month, you could probably find a box for those you could find a place for those on your VUCA box at the moment. So VUCA is sort of how we're framing the subject, but bringing it specifically to CFOs and accounting and finance, I don't think anyone will be surprised by the next slide. So, we are UK focused on this slide, but it's happening everywhere in the world, right? And 80%, I saw some research, public research recently, 80% of CFOs at the moment are worried about inflation. They're citing the sort of rising costs as their top reason for negative outlooks. But we want to break that down a bit and see whether there is something else happening in the market, something else happening in businesses that we can all lean on today, which is where our wonderful panel comes in. So I'd like to introduce you today, and they will magically appear when I go through this. We have Abi Obimenge, who is the European Finance Director for projects at Honeywell. We have Natalia Irvin, who is the Finance Deal Analyst from Capgemini. And we have Dr. Rolf Gegenmantel, who is the Chief Product Officer at Jedox, and then yours truly. So guys, I thank you for joining me today. I would just like to sort of frame this VUCA term and ask this a very open question to you to kick things off. As I said, VUCA is a sort of war room acronym almost that I feel really sums up what's happening today. But are we really in this sort of very complex, almost survival mode, or is something else happening? And do you think we'll be able to push past this survival mode? And I'll come to Abby first as your top of the list.
I think VUCA, yes, I think it has always been around. I think it just at different phases, but this might be a place where following the pandemic and then all the issues that came out from the pandemic, I still think we are in some kind of element of a VUCA mode, and yes, some kind of element of a survival mode. For me, survival mode in the pandemic was different because we're all in it together. It's like the bottom fell out at the same time, so every industry, every area was going through it together. I think coming out of the pandemic and what I hear from my business partner and from my previous world and life, it's that we are in different industries and in different sectors having some kind of survival mode and looking at things to make sure that we can put together this VUCA and make some sense out of it while we support our business and help them make those strategic decisions.
Making sense out of this time is going to be critical, I'm sure. Dr. Rolf, coming to you, how do we make sort of sense out of this time? Are we still in survival mode, or can we push past this today?
Of course, really depends a little bit on the region or the segment that we are in, when there is a survival mode or not. But I think what is the common thing is that things are dramatically changing super fast. And if we wouldn't do anything, just move on like we did in the past, we would probably be in survival mode because we need to adapt. And I think the secret of most organizations somehow worked through this and survived was how to adapt and how to adjust quickly, and having the right tools, processes, information in place to be able to adapt quickly. And I think that's how I see it. Even if for some people, actually, the quick change is a chance, and they can build business on that, or adapt their business in a way that they take even advantage of this. Of course, not for everyone possible, but it really depends on from which perspective you're looking at it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the expression goes, don't waste a good crisis, because everyone's changing already. So Natalia, I will come on to you, but I just want to ask the audience this question first of all. I just think that it's always good to get a sense of where people are in the sorry, let me just quickly relaunch that. Good sense to get a good idea to get a sense of where the audience is on this. So if you look at the screen, there'll be a pop-up which is simply asking the question, making the statement, is my company out of survival mode or into recovery mode? If we'd have asked this during the pandemic, it would have probably been a very different answer. But I'm curious to sort of see where people are now, because there's an assumption that post-pandemic we're able to move on, but obviously there's a lot happening in the world. If we look at the marketing, everything's always rosy, and if we look at the hype, it's even rosier. But it'd be good to get a sense of where everybody is on this question. Right, so if we just launch that, let's have a look at these results. And Natalia, sort of coming to you on the first question about sort of survival, if I look at these results here, we're seeing 36% of people saying that they're in recovery mode. In fact, they're even growing. 12% are saying they're growing, which is great. But that leaves an awful lot of people, definitely 32% here disagreeing. And then there's another 32% not sure or neutral at the moment. So maybe their company hasn't sort of changed much during this time. What's your take? Because you have a slightly different view on this as being a financial analyst.
Thank you, Chris, and hello, everyone. I think I really agree with what Abby said. It really varies sector by sector, company by company, because if we all think back to March 2020, there was a lot of VUCA, and I think lots of businesses felt like they didn't know what they needed to do. Will we ever be able to leave our houses? Now, if I look at it, my company certainly is in growth, because we are IT consultancy. Everybody wanted to streamline their systems, etc. So from what I see, we are not in survival mode anymore. And if you go down the high street, if you go to London, there are lots of new places, lots of new restaurants, people are socializing. Having said that, I think the effects of pandemic, effects of geopolitical situation everywhere, inflation, to some degree Brexit probably still, all of that is impacting us. So we definitely have volatility, uncertainty, and all of these elements impacting us. Is it new? I don't think it is, because we've seen this, or maybe not me personally, but generations, etc., have seen this all before.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's my understanding.
And it's worth saying that you are indeed Ukrainian, so you will be sort of very close to volatility and uncertainty. And thanks for coming on today to sort of give your points of view.
Thank you. It's all about definition of survival. So I think in this country we are not in survival. In Ukraine they are in survival mode. Yeah.
True, and that's a good point, which kind of leads us on to the next question. So in business today, like, what are the complexities that we're talking about? And I think everyone's sort of saying there's a mix of where companies are, almost a third and a third split. Some are growing, some are in recovery, some aren't at all. So what is the complexity in business today, and are those issues only short term? I highlight inflation. Is this just a short term thing? Are the complexities within your business just a short term thing? Abby, what's your sort of view on what's happening on the ground and whether this is a short term thing or a long term thing?
Like I said, I don't think survival or complexity, it's only related to VUCA. I think VUCA just makes it bigger and makes it more, the need to actually look at it from a different point of view, depending on what you are surviving. So it all depends. You will always have those complexity, whether it's cash flow, whether it's inflation, like Nadia said. It's not the first time we've been through a cycle of uncertainties. How we manage that ourselves out through that uncertainty, and how we ensure that we have the right tool to actually pivot or actually stay in survival mode to be able to get into the growth phase. So it's managing the complexity, not just because we're in a VUCA situation, because we've named it that, because everybody and at every time will be through a VUCA, or even a life cycle of a business represents that to a great extent. So how do we take those complexities that we're used to? In COVID time, it was cash flow. Everybody was making sure they had cash to pay their suppliers or to pay their employees. And then there was the other time of now we are looking at, in a different industry, how do we mitigate our supply chain problems and maybe increase our stock values that we haven't had before? Or how do we look at in the retail sector? How do we close down on the fact that we have too much footprints when we are trying to pivot into remote working? So the complexity depends on, back again to what I've said, the industry and where you find yourself. For me, I think there is a life cycle that goes through VUCA, and every industry will go through. So the complexity you are facing today might just be your growth sprout for tomorrow. Well, how do you manage it? So I think I've mentioned cash flow, I've mentioned the things in your balance sheet. How do you look from your balance sheet into your P&L to make sure it's not just a short-term view, but also looking at how you can survive or manage your stakeholders or your shareholders' view. So complexity in VUCA for me is just a bigger portion of our everyday complexity, but having to survive it to be able to maintain the company and still keep going is what I would suggest.
Yeah. Okay. Perfect. So, Rolf, are we saying that if you've got enough grey in your beard, this has happened before, we've managed it before. Complexity's always been there. Abby, I definitely take that point. But this does feel a little different. Do you feel that this is different?
Yes and no. So I think it has always been there, and of course, always the current situation feels that the most impactful one. And the thing is more the serious that when you think the last 3 years, there's constantly something going on. And what we learned with that is, to my opinion, is that first of all, things are happening faster and have much faster a global impact. So if you, I think just by digitalization, that everyone reacts and is informed in real time, things are just happening more quickly. The other thing is with having that global interconnectivity of value chains going across the globe, a little impact. So you could see with the ship in the canal, how global logistics didn't work. So a relatively small thing can have a global impact. And that's, I think, what makes it so feeling constantly this is going on. And that's I think, the difference, that it's not a certain small region that's impacted, that you sometimes can have a huge impact with a relatively small things.
Yeah, to those people who aren't aware of that, there was a there was a tanker, you know, that was blocking the Suez Canal, and that basically stopped the supply chain to most of Europe. And yeah, it was crazy seeing, you know, diggers on the side of the Suez Canal getting into the sand and a tug trying to pull this thing round. Yeah, so it's a great example of how fragile maybe our supply chains are. Again, I'm going to bring in a poll here just to get a sort of sense from the audience where they're at. You know, do you feel that, you know, this is a short-term thing or a long-term thing? You know, the question is, how long do you think it will be until we are out of significant VUCA? So maybe going back to something that feels more manageable from a business point of view. Yes, we've always had, you know, complexity, we've always had volatility, but maybe not as much as we're seeing now. And the answers are 1 to 2 years. So we're saying short term, you know, midterm 3 to 5, longer term 5 to 10, or never. You know, this is it. This is the world that we live in now. To Rolf's point, you know, Natalia, what's your sort of take on these? You know, in business today, maybe some things that are coming through some of your appraisals.
What my answer to this question be?
Well, going back to the you know, short term, long term.
Oh yes,
I wasn't
yeah,
sure whether you'd answer that, and then we'll see what the audience says afterwards.
Yeah, I think in terms of complexity, I think my generation would definitely had it very good for 10 or 20 years. But if you look back, so if you think about rising inflation, we have mentioned, but then there's mental health crisis, geopolitical instability, and then also broadening array of stakeholders have their diverse needs. So if you are in retail, the move to online and shops are closing. So all of that complexity has to be taken into consideration. But is it new? Because if you think at other industries like Kodak, or where there was the whole industry in Liverpool when they're creating horse accessories, and then cars were introduced, all that went out of the window. Typewriters, that was a big business, and then computers came. So it's like throughout history, it happens the whole time. But I think complexity, the opposite is clarity. So how do you achieve clarity and you consider all these factors? So in my job, it's bids, so we have big projects, and to be honest, not much has changed since you know, throughout pandemic, etc. So in my job, there isn't, I mean, it's complex, but there isn't new stuff like consumer behaviors that we see.
Okay. Yeah, and I really like that phrase, you know, creating clarity. I think that kind of sums up what our role is at the moment, and we'll come on to that. So I'm just going to share the results here just to see where everybody is. Oh, let me just see. Hopefully that has shared. If not, I will talk through it. So we're saying short term 29%. The midterm is the majority. So 43% are saying midterm. 3 to 5 years is when. So this is looking forward. You know, how long we're living in this VUCA, this significant complexity. So 3 to 5 years is the main. Only 10% saying longer term than that. So that's good. I think a lot of people breathe a sigh of relief. But interestingly, we have 19% saying never. You know, we're never out of this. This is basically business as usual now, and we need to deal with that. You know, Rolf, what's your sort of take on those numbers? You know, we've got 19% saying never. We're simply living in a more complex world and we need to adjust to it.
I think I come back to what Natalia mentioned at the beginning. It really depending the definition of VUCA. I think the world will not get slower and the world will not get less complex. And we need to handle as businesses with that complexity and at that speed. I think is this always life-threatening or the survival mode? I don't think so. And for that reason, it's really, I think, a little bit of how do you interpret the question of when we get out of this. I think if we are really in survival mode, yes, we will get out of this. Will it be less complex? I don't think so.
So how do we, and Rolf, maybe you follow on to this, how do we create the clarity that we need? How can we be more agile in our approaches, right? If most people are saying, 43% saying, we're living with a 3 to 5 year kind of world that we need to get our hands around, and many more are saying that this is the way it is now. There's definitely the vast majority are looking to create this clarity, this agility. How do we do that?
Yeah, I think I would separate it into the short-term, mid-term, and long-term aspect. So first of all, to handle this short-term, I think it is when we are in a mode that's everything is changing pretty quickly. It's about looking into the future, doing in a business forecasts more often to get really a very thorough understanding where we are. So we see companies and customers of ours and other companies doing rolling forecasts, again, much more closely, doing weekly forecasts, monthly forecasts, really to know where you stand. Often combined with how to do the forecast, what gives you the best indication of what's going on by integrating operational drivers that are an indicator of the future progression of the business. And that's one capabilities I need to have. The other thing is then when something changes, because the world is complex, it's super difficult to understand which impact does this have in different aspects. And that means to understand which options you have is you simulate different scenarios. And this scenario planning, I think, is the second building block. That's more for the midterm when you're starting to learn from the short-term insights. What does that mean? What should I do? And the last thing is what you could see through the pandemic, that some companies really reinvented their business model or changed it significantly. And this means you adapt your organization, and that's nothing that you can do quickly, but moving an on-site and on-premise or an in-person organization into a virtual, an online organization to deliver trainings online that have been trainings on site, delivering complete new business models based on that. That's what we've seen during the pandemic. And I think that's then the long-term piece, which means also from a management perspective, changing the business model means changing the instruments that you're using to plan your business, to manage your business, to measure your business. And it has to be adaptable enough to be able to do so.
Yeah, and obviously there's been many pandemic stories around people like Zoom and Hopin and all these platforms that have become unicorns overnight. We have our own specific tool set, and obviously you cover one of those. Just Abby, coming to you, you're meeting the business, you have this business demand, and they're obviously making demands of your reporting, your planning, your forecasting. How are you kind of acting to this business demand? How can you create sort of clarity and maybe are you actually introducing new things to create this new agility?
I think maybe I just touch on the poll. I think the poll for me just gives a good reflection of how a forecast works. So the people that did 0 to 2 years, maybe they live in that level of forecasting and process. So the rolling forecasting, the ability to do your normal budgeting, and then the midterm survey was actually for those that are looking at the 3 to 5 year plan. And then the nevers are those that are looking for the long term and the strategic thinking and all that. And every aspect of that is quite important to driving a business, because if you take each one of them in isolation, you don't actually get the golden thread of how you survive. So when you speak of the various elements, we know that data is important. And from the COVID pandemic, we know that those businesses that survived were the ones that were data natives and could use and pull on their data. So for me, your ability, before you even start reporting, let's look at your vision and your strategy first, instead moving about how that makes sense and how you piece it together over time. Because in a VUCA environment, what Ralph mentioned. He said the reason why it's so impactful is because today we are connected by the internet and by every other person's inability to disrupt our business. So for me, as in FP&A, what I look out to be a business partner is not understanding just what the data says, but how does it affect me from an operational and macro and economic aspect of it, to be able to help drive that various elements. And who I'm speaking to, because sometimes you have to be in the short term to be able to survive the long term. And sometimes you need to know why you are doing things in the long term to be able to pull the short term people along with you. So for me, every element and every forecast is for a reason. You are not just forecasting for the sake of it. And if you are doing that, as we want takeaway, I want you to go back and look at why are you surviving? What are you trying to grow? And those are things that when the business partners come to me, because I understand both the long term and the short term, I should be able to place them and guide them in the right direction as we go through that complexity. Nadia talked about clarity. It's quite important in the level in a VUCA environment, but also the vision, to make sure your vision is clear and then you run with it. Everybody understands it, so that when that forecasting element is, or when you tell people, I can't give you this now because there is a reason why, not because we are just surviving, oh, we just need to do it, oh, the world is falling apart. Why are you doing it? That communication helps the data element of it, because the human aspect of data makes it more intelligent, not just data itself. So having that connection and speaking to people as you draw out those reports, it's much more than just numbers.
And bringing in that sort of people's side, the very real world that we live in, you know, from the community, we're hearing a lot about inflation, but we're hearing a lot about wage inflation, and there was a trend, you know, not so long ago about the Great Recession, and I think that's driven, you know, change in the workforce, but also people's expectations when they start to look for new jobs. On a real practical note, Abby, if you don't mind, and maybe you can sort of talk away from your current position, but, you know, what's your view on how to manage or plan, you know, for wage inflation, right? Are we saying, you know, when we sit down with the business, are we trying to sort of construct scenarios and arguments, you know, for where we want to put it? Or are we simply saying no to people? You know, you manage a team as well. Do you see wage inflation as a problem?
Are we talking not from my organization? I'll be talking, all I've been saying is from my past experience. That's what I'd like to clarify. In terms of wage experience, I think as part of our spot forecasting, we do that to a great extent to see where our people are and what we have to do to keep people in the right place and in the right opportunity, because you need to make sure you have the right skill to be able to drive the right growth. So I think for every company, I think everybody is going through that analysis to make sure that you are having the right people with the right cost and with the right salary, so that you keep your best hands in. At the same time, you have to make those decisions. And I know during COVID, in most organizations, there were employees that were giving up their salaries just because that was the right thing to do. And I think for every organization will come up with their vision for their process. And sometimes it's already written. So why are we rewriting the rules now? Because we are in a VUCA environment and we've named it as DOS. So when we look at all these things, when we stitch them together, it is back again to the communication and the trust you have within your organization and how you move your organization forward. And what are you surviving on? Is this a survival period just to hold you through, or are you surviving, or are you making that decision based on various visions that you have? So when we talk about wage inflation, I think everybody is going through it, and every organization will do what is right for their business and for their growth initiatives.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, Natalia, coming to you on the sort of same sort of question around wage inflation, and this could be a personal point of view as well, right? You've moved around in your career. You know, how would you sort of approach managing wage inflation or planning for wage inflation today? And then Rolf, I'll come on to you maybe onto maybe things that we can change to do that better, if that's okay. So Natalia, you know, do you recognize wage inflation as an issue?
Yeah, most definitely. So in my previous role at a university where with a final salary pension scheme, it would just go up and up and up, and it was above inflation. So you can say we've been in VUCA for years. So yeah, you have contingency, you have allowance for people rotating. So you have people at the top, and then you know that junior talent will come in, so it kind of works out historically. Yeah, and you proactively invest in junior talent as well, but that's more of an HR topic. But I suppose us as finance people, we need to be aware of those issues. And you obviously have to be aware of your talent, like Abby said. Do you have the right mix of people? Are they delivering the right roles? All of that. And why we're here, why we're part of this organization, it's about automation, about improving your processes. You want to avoid people just sitting and copy and pasting spreadsheets from one to another. They can learn Power Query or some other tools, you know. So I think proactive learning and development is important. But also I think what we need to be aware of is the mental health at the moment. And there are so many people, not just in my current organization, but everywhere, they say, oh, such and such left, but because we are trying to cut costs, we didn't replace the person, and everybody seems to work harder. But I think it's a bit of a, it's not the right way of approaching it, because we need to ensure that we don't just cut costs and stretch our people more and more and manage our wage costs that way. Because obviously the more stressed people are, the less creative they are, and the less agile you become in this VUCA environment.
So it sounds like we can do a lot, right? We can do a lot to support people, and we can do a lot to change. But it's a very subjective thing, you know, wage inflation. You know, maybe Rolf, maybe looking at, you know, how we might actually change things and how we might manage a scenario like, you know, wage inflation with a line of business who's coming to me saying, I've got these guys over here who are happy, these guys over here who want 20%. You know, this is the line, you know, this conversation is in part about modeling. So, you know, what do we need to change?
I think it's not so easy to plan and to say, because we do not know how the inflation actually at the very end impacts the ability of the company to afford this, because inflation on the one hand is on the wages. The other thing is, what are our customers doing? And the company is doing fine, and customers are still purchasing the products and are probably willing to pay higher prices because they have to pay for everything higher prices. It's relatively easy, but we do not know. And that's why I think the way how to plan for this is, first of all, again, to prepare with understanding which options do we have, which degree of freedom do I have to pay more, and which percentage can I pay more for which areas, when whatever customer top line, the top line is increasing or staying the same or decreasing by 10 or 20%, what is the impact, so that I have the different scenarios. And that's, I think, where you can then, based on, make scenarios what you can afford to give to the employees. The other thing that we learned during the pandemic, where we had a similar situation of not knowing how, especially in the beginning, how does this impact our business, having scenarios, having transparency internally, at least, of understanding the patterns, makes it easier to communicate, because you can build trust when you're giving people an understanding in which situation we are and what we can afford and what we can't afford. We make the experience that a team that can trust you because you build trust, because you did the right things, you were careful with what you did, but you could keep the team alive by then we did not need to let anyone go, things like that. I think that pattern people remember, and you can build on this and manage expectation what's possible. And I think that gives us, and other things are, how much are you, how do you design when you're at the very end, execute the things of is this a long-term impacting decision, or can you compensate things with whatever one-time payments, because that gives you more flexibility to have more options going forward in case businesses develop differently than expected. And I think a lot is about that understanding, and that's where the planning scenario system, where you have the data available to simulate this, can help a lot.
Yeah, that's a great example there of, you know, I've heard a lot of people, we've done it ourselves, having these one-time payments, which obviously help, but it doesn't sort of adjust everything over a longer period of time. It's a great example, and I'm going to come back to one of the questions on this. And just a reminder, if you do have any questions, then drop it into the Q&A box, and I will come to it. But the third poll, so this is for the audience. Again, this is to get a sense of workload, I suppose. In terms of, you know, planning and managing this process, right? How many times have you budgeted and forecast this year? Yeah. So, and I didn't quite know how to sort of structure this, so I put it, you know, the same as usual, more than usual, significantly more than usual, or help, I'm just buried in this stuff, you know, like there's so much demand on me now that, you know, there's an issue. And the reason why I sort of kept it vague like that is because everyone's got different sort of targets and ambitions when it comes to planning and forecasting. But I would imagine most people would plan to, you know, budget once and potentially run rolling forecasts or forecasts sort of, you know, infrequently. So just going to have a quick look at the result. Perfect. So what have we got here? So 27% saying the same as usual. But obviously that leaves everybody else, the vast majority, saying more than usual, significantly more than usual, and a couple of people there buried. You know, Abby, is this your sort of experience? Are you sort of getting much more demand, therefore you're having to, you know, to work harder at managing this?
I don't work harder is a relative term, because if you are more agile, you have systems doing it for you. So the fact that it is more than usual, that doesn't mean it is harder than usual. It might just give you more to think about because your systems are more in tune. You can do things from a click of a button. You can get to your data much faster. So the idea of, being buried might not feel that way, but you are supporting the business during a different timeline. So in terms of feeling buried, is it because you feel like you're doing it and there is no output, or it's the definition of why you're forecasting and how recently you should be? And sometimes because there's a change, we don't always have to wait for the cycle to be done before we actually see, oh, this is an impact, so that we know how to advise the business or how to turn if we need to, or pivot in the right position. So for me, forecasting should be something that we should be doing because it's part of the fabric of our mindset as to how we improve ourselves or how we drive the right behavior or growth. So except it depends on the cycle. Every company has different cycle that I've worked with, and every cycle is there for a reason. So for me, I would prefer I forecast or I budget than not to have something in place that I can go back to and see where is a starting point. There is an African saying that says you don't set sail on another person's stars. You have to know what star you are following to be able to set sail and then change the course because you know what you're doing. But I would prefer to over forecast than to forecast at all.
I love that. I like the African sayings. You can bring them in more, please. You know, Rolf, just coming back to you on Abby's comment there, you know, I think there was a really good point, and there's a question as well that I'd like you to cover as well. But doing more doesn't necessarily mean more people work, right? More hours in the chair, more late nights, right? So is there what can we be doing to provide more output, you know, as Abby said, you know, aligned to the right stars, but not necessarily having to sort of feeling buried and swamped in this stuff?
Yeah, of course, it's the digitalization which you have in your climate with the data, finance, and so on. So you can make use of data, and as Abby said, you can automate things as much as possible. And with techniques like artificial intelligence, machine learning, to a certain degree, they can help. They might be difficult in cases where, because they are based on patterns that you have. And one thing of VUCA is that the pattern is hard to recognize. So it sounds easier than it actually sometimes is, but it can reduce the manual work a lot. And there's some other thing, even if you do not have the mechanism of to predict this, there are probably early warning indicators that you can look. And that's where you see why finance planning applications are going into more operations, because there you find the indicators. So when we started, for example, in the pandemic, immediately we started to have a weekly marketing lead monitoring and control process to see what's happening with our top line pipeline. And we could see where the leads are dropping out in which stage of the pipeline. And with that, we had an early warning, even though we didn't know what would come. And that was super helpful. And I think this is something that you can do. And at the very end, it brings us to much more these concepts that have been, whatever, I do not know how many years they are old, the beyond budgeting pieces that you say, what can I find out? And where do I stand? Well, how's the world developing, and what can I afford to do next? And I like that combination with the saying that we had before with the star where you go to. So the vision, of course, stays the same, but how you move and how fast you move in the right direction, that might change depending on what your system allows you, also the business status allows you to move on.
Yeah, excellent. And just touching on the couple of questions that we've got before we wrap up, that's flown by. So the question here is how can the panel basically balance expectations around long-term and short-term risk? For instance, there's been an increase in the interest rates. Maybe should that have been a sort of identified risk that we should already have been managing, or is that something that is just out of the blue and we have to react? So how do we sort of balance those short-term risks and those long-term risks? And I think, as you said, Rolf, any amount of machine learning or analytics would probably not have seen, the inflation rate at almost 10%. So, how can you sort of manage those risks better?
I think it's coming back to what I mentioned with the scenarios before. Because you do not know in which direction it's developing, you should plan for different scenarios. And that in a situation where states are printing money to pay for things that normally people had to work for, that an inflation is not, it can happen, to say it like this. So it's not super surprising. It was an option, I think, that is not completely surprising, probably the total amount that it goes so quickly. But that's coming back to the other point that I mentioned. Things are changing and things are changing quickly, that this might have been the impact. But the important piece, I think, is being prepared for what do I do at the moment I realize we are in this, which options do I have to act, and not then at that point in time just starting off, now I have to start thinking what I could do. That's what I see as the main thing for something that is really, really hard to predict.
Natalia, just to, extending that question to you, you're obviously working within, an analyst function. Would they have seen this level of inflation, or because it was, you said earlier that things haven't really changed from an operational point of view, but in terms of the numbers, would that have been predicted, or is that really left field?
It has not been predicted. Although when I ask our CEO, like, what are we doing? We only have certain, parameters, KPIs for inflation, and now it's going up. Should we change? He remained calm, and he said, well, he must have a bit more gray hair. He said, yeah, what can we do? Can we pass this inflation to the client? but then doesn't mean that our business will shrink. So it's a bit of a chain. So you say, oh, it costs us 10% more, so can you pay us 10% more? And the client will say no, because we can't charge our clients. So it's a bit of a balance. And so for us, for some bids, I work on bids that are from 1 year duration, or recently I was working on a bid that's 12 years long, and the client says, can you just provide a fixed price for 12 years? So, well, not really. So you sort of contractually manage it, where you agree to link your cost to CPI or some other index. So it's about managing business risk as well. You can't do it with a restaurant, some other business. That's why knowing what your levers, what your drivers in a business are for you to then balance those risks is very important. And I love, and I totally agree with what was said about systems, about having those systems going to enable you to adapt, have running forecasts, etc. But the problem with that is it's based on historic data predominantly, and to look into the future, like what you're asking, could we have foreseen such great inflation? No, we couldn't. And the same AI, if AI looks at historic data, we won't. That's why I think it's the changing our attitude and accepting the fact that we live in this environment that's very volatile, and we have to be agile. We have to have all the things lined up. We have to have data to base our decisions on. We also have to adapt and have resources, and people who are not afraid to fail and sort of throw different ideas of how to grow. And in the forecast, for example, with the talent wars, you can forecast to have 10 new members of staff, and then you simply just cannot get them. And what do you do then? So then it goes back to what Rolf said. It's about scenario planning. What if, and how would you deal with it?
And it's like what people say, a forecast is never right. A budget is never right. So, as Abby said earlier, make sure you've got a good reason for doing it. Look, I'm going to sort of wrap it up now, and I will come back to sort of Abby and Rolf for your takeaways as well. Natalia, that was sort of a great one, I think, about being adaptable. I think that's probably one of the biggest takeaways for this. Now, I do want to congratulate one of our audience members, though, who is saying that they did model 10% inflation over, what's that, 9 months ago. So whatever you're doing, if you could share that with the community, that would be great. But Abby and Rolf, what would be your takeaway from this? What can people sort of do tomorrow to sort of manage this from a modeling point of view? And if we keep it to sort of like a minute, just maybe one thing to inspire people. So Rolf, I'll come to you first, and then Abby last.
Yeah, I think it's really to identify where's the problem or what is missing, why we can't make quick decisions. Is it already because you do not have the information? Is it because you can't do the scenarios? Or is it, is there any other reason? I think that is the first of all, because there are very different reasons that are behind that. And then the other thing is really what we also have just heard is that mindset. We need to get used that this is the way how you deal in complex systems. And when you think how you're in other areas are working in an agile environment, using these processes of getting more information from a broader team, from more stakeholders in there, thinking more in shorter, in agile sprints, what can I achieve in a certain point in time to get there, and having the North Star, so that where are you going, but how you get there, this changes, and that's the way how you would budget differently. I think these concepts, having in mind and having tools and systems in place that can support this, where you not just do your annual budget once a year and then you want to make that number in a year where you have such fundamental changes in very short time. I think this is going better.
Excellent. And Abby, just in 10 seconds, I know that everyone's got to find their African star, right? That's a great bit of advice. But, you know, what can people do tomorrow in terms of their sort of modeling capability?
I'll say develop yourself. Look in the mirror and say, what can I learn? What can I improve on? Because you're the greatest asset any company we have. You're an extension to any data that we have or any AI tool that we have. Your ability to get better and to guide your own VUCA and be better, want to know more, want to use the system more, is what I would say. So find something in yourself. Never stop learning, because you learn and you put it into the business and you extend the use of the beautiful tools that you have, or the systems that you have, or the layering of information, or even your ability to network or collaborate. Those are skill sets that are needed to be able to navigate this. So once I'll say it, look to yourself and improve, develop, refresh your knowledge, find out what's new, learn from the digital natives, so you're getting older, and improve your knowledge.
Yeah, perfect. Well, that is a perfect way to end, especially for our community, Gen CFO. Abby, Natalia, Rolf, thank you very much for giving us your insights today. I think there was an awful lot in there, from a personal journey to a technology journey, and hopefully there's a bit of reassurance for people who might have felt that they were on their own in a fairly complex world. So thank you for that. Just going to wrap up with a couple of notices, and like I said, we've got plenty of things going on at Gen CFO all the time. And the last thing I wanted to just sort of show you was that we have an academy coming up. It's an online, virtual academy. You might have been part of ones that we've done before. We have some incredible names there this year, and I think it's a really pertinent time for us to kind of share as a community, especially given so much uncertainty happening in our world and in our profession even. So on the 8th and 9th of November, we have a 2-day seminar, virtual seminar, and it's CPD accredited. I know a lot of people have those sort of CPD deadlines coming up at the end of the year, so it might be a way of just getting this done as well. You will be able to get the replays and the recordings for that as well. So it's a great couple of days for you if you are interested in learning about the community. And I'm going to leave that on the screen here, this QR code, which might make it a little bit easy to go and find that website, and I believe it's in the chat as well. So thanks again. I'm going to call it a wrap there, and thank you for your questions. And Natalia, Abby, Rolf, thanks again, and see you on and offline soon.